Today on The State of Us, 4 big economic problems exposed by baby formula. Welcome to The State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined, of course, today by the one and only, our friendly redneck liberal, and the senior historian here at True Chat, Mr. Lance Jackson. Today, we're looking at an article that was in the morning newsletter of the New York Times a little while back, but we're talking about it now because there's some interesting things here. We've all heard about the baby formula shortage, I'm sure. It's been going on for a while, but this specifically highlights 4 big economic problems that have been exposed as a result. So we'll use baby formula as a way to frame the discussion, but these are problems that aren't exclusive to baby formula by any means. And what we're looking at ultimately in the first segment is big business and big bureaucracy. How has that led to problems with baby formula, but how is it leading to problems across the U.S. economy? The second segment, which I'm really excited for, the gerontocracy. And this is the notion of how the U.S. has long put a higher priority on taking care of the elderly than taking care of young families. We're going to talk about that notion, how it speaks to baby formula, but also the larger economy as a whole. And then, of course, in the third segment, we'll talk about the obvious. And I'm not going to tell you what that is. Hopefully, as you're listening to the show, you can come up with what would be the other thing. I gave you 3. What is the 4th? So, Lance, before we dive in, do we have a word of the day?
We're going to demur to you because you kind of came up with the word of the day for today. But I'm going to let you kind of define it because I'm going to read my definition. It doesn't really fit what the article says. And it's kind of an oxymoronic word when you think of the title of the show is baby formula. But gerontocracy. You like all that? Huh? I gave you about 4 word of the days.
I was going to say, there's
opening.
a lot of big words in there. People are going to be confused which one's the word of the day.
But Justin wanted gerontocracy, so it's 5 syllables. GER.
Hey, I just want that noted. Did you hear what Lance said?
You wanted it.
5-syllable word.
5-syllable word. You picked it. GERONTOCARCY. And you want it as the word of the day when the lead is baby formula. But anyway, I don't know if you tried to say something, but my teeth still work. But my dictionary says government by old men. I don't think that really fits what the article is trying to say, right? So you kind of looked up on the big World Wide Web.
The Oxford Dictionary tells us that gerontocracy is a noun, and it means a state, society, or group governed by old people. And then below that, it says a government based on rule by old people.
Okay. There you go, folks. Gerontocracy. A little oxymoronic attitude when you're talking about baby formula, but we're not really talking about baby formula. We're talking about the economy, which yours truly thoroughly enjoy. So, Justin, what's the first topic I get to rail against this morning?
So these two, we're kind of putting them together. They're at least going to both be covered back to back because I think they tie in. So big business is the first one that we're discussing. And it's no secret that the baby formula industry has something in common with a lot of other U.S. industries, and that's that it's become highly concentrated. And you might say, well, how concentrated has it become? Well, that's a great question, and I'm here to tell you just that. Over the past few decades, 3 companies make nearly all of the formula that Americans use. Abbott is the largest of the 3 with roughly 40% of the market. So pretty concentrated. If you're going to buy baby formula, right, there's a really good chance that it's going to be provided to you by one of 3 companies. And even if you wanted to get it from somebody else, you probably couldn't. And that's a hint here at the next component, which is big bureaucracy. And you mean, well, what do you mean I couldn't get it from somebody else if I wanted to? Well, 2 things. Number 1, in the United States, there's really not many other options. And then if we look at, well, could I buy it from some other country? The answer, generally speaking, is no. And why? here's where the big bureaucracy comes in. The FDA's inflexibility has hampered its COVID policy, and baby formula turns out to be another one of the case studies. Many formulas sold in Europe, for example, actually exceed the FDA's nutritional standards, but they're banned from being sold in the US, often because of technicalities like labeling.
The big business thing, this really irks me, folks, okay? Because this is America. Well, this is about competition, right? But this corporate concentration that's taking place in the U.S. economy basically hurts only one group of people, and that is the consumer, which is the whole reason for the economy to exist. Because of this corporate concentration, the author of this article argues, and I tend to agree with them, that companies now face less competition, allowing them to keep prices higher and wages lower. So the only people who benefit from this concentration of companies are the companies. This lack of competition is actually hurting the economy. And it's keeping big businesses big, which means they're making more money, their workers are making less money, and the consumers are paying higher prices. I don't see how any of us say that that's a good thing, okay? And then you go into your big bureaucracy and the whole concept, and here's where it gets a little dicey, but we have to save American jobs. Okay?
I was just thinking about this, globalization.
So, right? We have to save American jobs. So what are we going to do? Well, other people make baby formula, and many of the formulas sold in Europe, according to this article, exceed, you heard that right, exceed the FDA's nutritional standards. So the stuff they're making in Europe is better for our children than what's being made in the United States. Because, hey, if you don't have any competition, you don't have to have any standards. So you can just make whatever you want and raise the price and sell it, because you don't have to say, well, ours does better than such and so, because, oh, wait a minute, such and so from Europe is banned on being sold here in the United States because of technical laws like the way they label it, okay? And then President Trump made this even worse because of, the trade policy, because we're going to, it's going to be America first, America first. Okay, so now you're going to pay more if you can find it. But now it's harder to import formula from Canada, our neighbor to the north. And while these policies help big business, they help big business at the expense of young families who are trying to raise the newest Americans.
And to your point, it is complicated because we've talked a lot about, obviously, especially in recent months, but throughout the pandemic, the way that when there is global crisis like this, the downsides of global supply chains are exposed. I think one thing that's been exposed by this, though, is the vulnerability of our own supply chain, right? And that's where, and this is part of why I think, Lance, the average American sort of can get taken advantage of inadvertently by our lawmakers. I mean, they shouldn't take advantage of us, but I think they do, because they try to boil down global economics into a basic globalization is good or it's bad. And to say that it's just good or bad is just, I think it's short-sighted. There are things about globalization that are positive, right? There are things about it that are negative. A negative is this semiconductor shortage, right? If you have driven by a dealership recently, you have noticed that, oh my gosh, they have like no cars. Why is that? And if I want to go buy a new car, the price seems to be outrageous. Why is that? Well, because semiconductors, by and large, are not made in the United States, and we're having trouble getting them imported. So that would be a negative globalization effect, right? A bad thing to keeping things in our own country and not globalizing is baby formula, because there are other countries that have a supply. There are ways that we could supplement it, but we can't because of restrictive bureaucracy that prevents us from doing that. And to Lance's point, if we can't compete, then why would we lock down the market for ourselves, and lock it down to just a few companies? Again, I'd be okay with either way. We either need to temporarily open it up, right, to allow the sale of things that meet our standards from other countries, especially close countries. I mean, it's not like we're talking about bringing baby formula in from China, right? Or Russia. We're talking about baby formula from Europe, like probably, and Canada, like our closest allies in the whole world. If we can't trust them, then who can we trust, So I think that there's that side of, we try to simplify globalization, and yes, we want American jobs, and no, we don't want to, cost people who work for these baby formula companies their job. At the same time, one of the issues that's highlighted of this is that, the supply for baby formula is pretty steady most of the time. And so we say, well, what caused this? Well, there was a shutdown in February of a Michigan factory of one of the large producers of formula. Well, when that happens, because of our bureaucracy, right, and because of the concentration, it's not like there's 20 other competitors who are just going to be able to ramp up their supply a little bit to make up for it. You have basically 2 other main players, and they have to now consume a huge portion of that, and they can't just do that overnight, right? It's not just like they snap their fingers and we're going to start cranking more stuff out.
Well, and because of that, and because we won't allow trade to come in from our neighbors, that many wily Americans who had to take care of their children said, because they live close to a border, and I read this in some complimentary articles, they got in their car and drove to grocery stores in Mexico and in Canada and came back with the limit that they could bring, not only for themselves and their neighbors. So once again, here we expect the government to help us, and the average American is having to take it upon themselves to figure out a way around this problem, which shows the ingenuity of the American people. But the bigger question is, why do we have to do that? Isn't the government supposed to be there for the only reason they exist is to make it easier for us? If the government's not making it easier, why do they exist in the first place? If they're not protecting us, why are they there in the first place?
Something's not right in that economy. Something's not right.
It sure doesn't sound it to me.
Well, I wonder how it got that way. Maybe that's what we're talking about coming up. Gerontocracy. That is a state, society, or group governed by old people. What does that have to do with an economic problem facing the United States that was exposed by baby formula? To find out, keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back. There's a lot of children in the United States, a lot of them. In fact, 1 in 5 Americans, just for numbers' sake, that's about 73 million Americans, are under the age of 18. By contrast, only 1 in 7 Americans is over the age of 65, or about 54 million Americans. So there are actually more young people than there are old people, yet we're talking about gerontocracy. Why is that? The few, or the many governed by the few. How does that come into play? Well,
because old people vote. Oh, sorry.
Is that what it is? Well, we don't let children vote?
No.
Oh, okay.
Well, I mean, the group you said,
right,
under the age of 18,
they can't vote.
They don't vote.
Oh.
And that group that you said is older than 65, turn out, they are a much higher percentage of the voting public. That would be good to know. I just say that parenthetically, but historically that's always been true, that the older age groups tend to get out and vote. Therefore, lawmakers pay more attention to them. Doesn't mean they should, but that's the way the system is working.
Yeah, I mean, you pay attention to the people that speak the loudest because they're who you hear the most. I mean, sometimes we give it devious intent, and I'm not saying that there aren't lawmakers out there, right, with devious intent who are, we don't care about the children, we're going to take care of the old people. But I think it's also one of those things where if the people that you see, right, who are showing up to your town hall, who you see at the voting booth, who sends you emails, who writes you letters, who call your office, if all of those people are over the age of 65 or older, then 2 things happen. Number 1, you're more likely to believe that they have more problems. Simply, just simple psychology, right? Because you're hearing about it more. People are bothering you all the time about this. So, well, there must be problems because that's who I hear from. The other thing that also takes place that I think is important to understand is you become more familiar with those problems, right? Because you hear about them more because you believe there's a bigger problem. Chances are those lawmakers also have their offices paying more attention to that. they're the people that are also donating to you. So again, it's this whole, yes, there is devious intent sometimes. There's also just that bias of it's what I hear about, it's who I hear from, and it's the information I'm familiar with.
Or if you watch TV, they're the people that are running the government. Democrat or Republican. I'm not picking on political parties. You watch TV and you watch your local mayor or your state, your governor or your state senators or your member of the House of Representatives, and odds are they're part of the gerontocracy.
I just like to, again, point something out here. The average age of members of the House, beginning with the 116th Congress, was 57.6 years old. Senators were 62.9 years old. By contrast, right, Lance, the median age in the United States of America is 38 and a half years old. So the median age of Congress, 57, almost 58 for the House and 63 for the Senate. But the median age of the country is 38.
I'm telling you, I'm in that old government group, right? I'm railing against myself, right? My own generation. But I think we need to understand that, that what we're doing is harming children. Okay. And really, and here's, do the elderly serve a purpose? Yes. Am I saying we shouldn't take care of them? Not at all, because you need the old people around to guide the youngsters. But if we're not taking care of the youngsters, it makes it very difficult for the elderly to help guide the youngsters, okay? We have to take care of them, and we're not doing that. We're not taking care of the young at the same rate as we take care of the elderly. And in my book, that's just wrong, even though I'm one of the olders, okay? I'm not saying we don't take care of the elderly. I'm saying we need to take care of the generations that are coming up, and we need the elderly to help to do that. But if we help the elderly at the expense of the young, that's not a good system.
So the other thing,
do you notice that, folks? You won't notice it because Bradley will take that out, but I stumpified Justin. He didn't know what to say to that. It's like, yeah, that makes sense.
No. I was thinking about the reality of our representation, because we talked about percentages of representation in Congress, right? And in the Senate and the House. And for those that may not remember this from your, social studies class or your civics class, or who maybe weren't taught it at all, you know how many people in the United States Congress are under the age of 25? None.
Well, they can't.
Exactly. That's my point.
Justin trying to trick you folks, but your friendly redneck liberal will save you. Trick question there. You can't do it. Why can't you do it? Go ahead, Justin.
Because the Constitution says that you got to be at least 25 years of age in order to be in the House of Representatives. And then if I asked you, how many senators do we have that are under the age of 30? The answer would also be 0. And why is that? Because the Constitution says that you got to be at least 30 years old to be in the United States Senate. Now, I'm not saying that we want necessarily a 12-year-old in the House of Representatives, right? I'm not necessarily getting at that. But what I am saying is when we talk about gerontocracy...
Hey, if they have good ideas, I'd vote for them.
When we talk about gerontocracy, part of it is, it literally means, right, a society governed by old people. And I think you would have a hard time arguing that we don't have that given the median age of the U.S. population versus the median age of our lawmakers. And having old people in government is not a bad thing, right? I'm not saying that we shouldn't have any old people in government. But the fact that the median age of our lawmakers is so drastically out of step with the median age of the country, I do think that is a bad thing. Because again, it's not that old people are devious or like they don't care about young people at all, but they are more sensitive to what they're going through in their life, right? And the things that they know and understand. And if it's been 20 or 30 years since they had a kid that needed a formula, it's just not front of mind, right? It doesn't mean they're evil. It's just that they're not thinking about that because it's not like they're going home and using baby formula. Where on the other hand, if you have somebody in Congress who has a child and they have to go buy baby formula and they're having a hard time finding it or they're paying 3 or 4 times the price, they're probably going to be standing up, raising the alarm bell saying, oh my gosh, this is horrendous. How can we allow this to happen?
Well, I feel bad saying this, but I don't even know what the price of baby formula is today. I mean, it's been...
And you care about babies.
And I care about babies, right? I don't know what the price of...
But why would you know that?
Of Huggies or Pampers, are. I mean, the only time I ever get to look again is like when my wife goes to a baby shower, for a friend or a friend's daughter or whatever. And then I'm given the job of going to the store and, well, I need to, you need to pick up 4 or 5 things of Pampers because I'm going to make this gift for blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay. And I go like, oh my gosh, I just spent $75 and, don't email this folks. I mean, tell me how off I am, but I don't think I'm too far off because I just you don't buy it out of sight, out of mind, right? Same thing with formula, with baby food, diapers, all of this thing. You don't know, to your point, if you're not in it every day. And if you've got old Congress people, they don't know. I remember there was a gentleman who was a senator from Tennessee, Lamar Alexander, running for president. And a person in the audience said, well, what are you going to do about the price of milk? And he started talking and somebody asked him, one of the reporters said, well, what is the price of milk? And Lamar Alexander turns to one of his aides. He goes, how much is a gallon of milk? He didn't know. He was so, our senators sometimes are so removed. They don't do their own shopping. They don't go to the grocery store. So they hear this stuff, but they really don't know what the price of things are and the impact it has on young families and on young people.
Americans over 65 receive universal health insurance, Medicare, and most receive a regular government check, Social Security. Many children, by contrast, live in poverty. Relative to other affluent countries, the U.S. spends a notably smaller share of its budget on children. And you might be sitting there saying, well, that sounds sort of like socialism, right? Universal health care, regular government checks. It is. We have socialism for old people. Now, it may not be perfect, right? I'm not here to tell you that Medicare and Social Security are excellent. I have parents who, well, not both of my parents, one of my parents gets Social Security and receives Medicare, and they are far from perfect systems. But I don't get either of those things, right? I'm not eligible to receive either. And just simply because of age, my father is, right? Now, you might say, well, how does that really play in? I mean, what's poverty actually look like? Well, it's great that you asked because, again, we have the answer to that. We're looking at 2020 numbers from a Census Bureau report in March of 2021, okay? Children under the age of 18, the percentage living in poverty, including Social Security, 16.1%. Adults aged 18 to 64, 10.4% when you're including Social Security, and adults aged 65 and over when you're including Social Security, 9%. So the lowest impoverished group, right, by our current measured standards, are old people. And the highest impoverished group is who? People under the age of 18.
Almost twice as many.
Almost twice as many. Now,
who make up a bigger percentage of the population.
Who make up, yes, a larger percentage of the U.S. population. They make up 1 in 5 versus 1 in 7 for the old people. Now, the thing that I think is important also to point out there is how Social Security impacts that. If we take away Social Security, okay, from the old people, now the script is flipped. 37.8% of old people, 65 and over, right? They would be in poverty. Almost 38% of old people would be in poverty if there was no Social Security. But because of Social Security, 16,097,000 Americans are not in poverty because of Social Security. By contrast, Social Security only lifts less than 1 million children out of poverty, 977,000. You take Social Security away, and the children living in poverty goes to 17.4% instead of 16.1%. So Social Security, I mean, this tells us right here definitively Gerontocracy, right? The reason that we don't have as many old people living in poverty at the moment is because Social Security is there for them. And Lance, of course, will make the point, as I imagine coming up, that that may not be the case, because what would happen if there wasn't Social Security? Well, we're going to talk about that. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. Gotta love a gerontocracy. You put the old people in charge, and they're going to make sure that rather than 38% of them living in poverty, there's only 9% living them in poverty. For children, though, there's
wasn't the intent. That's how it's ended up. That was not the intent.
Well, and here's that correlation. Don't
take numbers out of context.
I'm not.
Yeah, you are.
I think that
yes, you are.
I think that because old people primarily occupy our government seats, right? They are more likely to be attuned to the problems facing the elderly.
Okay, to your point, though, of earlier about when did Social Security begin?
As a result, well, depending on how you want to argue it, as a result of the Great Depression.
Okay, so back in the 1930s.
And it was created, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think because we had so many elderly people who we saw, this is unacceptable. We can't allow our elderly to become homeless and die and starve, and having them impoverished this way is just an unacceptable part of society.
And also to get them out of the workplace so that younger people could get a job.
Because to not die and starve, they had to work until they died.
Exactly. And what was the average age of death for Americans in the 1930s?
I can tell you.
Oh, you didn't pay attention in your history class?
Well, I tried.
It was sometimes. It was 66. So why did the government choose 65 as the age to get to get Social Security?
Yeah, well, we didn't have to pay for you very long.
Exactly.
We have to pay a lot longer for you.
All right. So we haven't adjusted the system. It wasn't the system, the Social Security system, when it was initiated more than almost 90 years now, 90 years ago, was not meant to be a retirement system. It was not meant to fund the lives of the elderly for 15, 20, 30 years. Okay? But that's what it's become. And as I said to you in the pre-show prep, how much money, how many billions of dollars are spent by people during their wage earning years on the economy and boosting and creating jobs because they know they have Social Security at the end as a retirement system? How many people are putting money away on top of Social Security, which is why your numbers show that it would be so many elderly living in poverty without Social Security, because they've spent their entire 40 years of working life or more knowing that they had this money at the end. And so that allowed them to spend money, which you say, well, they should have been saving that. Okay, they can save it, but then what happens to the economy? The economy slows down. Then that doesn't create as many jobs for the young people that are coming up. So there is a good side to Social Security.
We've also talked about, though, since Social Security is being used in a way that it wasn't originally designed to be used, there are better solutions to accomplish the same goal that Social Security's original goal versus what it does today, right? The new goal of Social Security is different than it was back then. And if we're honest about what that new goal is, there are better ways to address that goal than Social Security in its current form.
I couldn't agree with you more. And that's my whole point for wanting to do this show, is that we hear about this all the time, but we're not doing anything about it. And I think your point is the reason we're not doing anything about it is you're making the rationalization, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the elderly people in the government don't want to change the system. I mean, because to
they're
me,
nervous about it.
It's obvious that it should be changed. Okay. It should be changed. I mean, yes, as you get older, you become a little more frail. You can't do as much as you used to do. I'm 61. I can't do as much as I used to, but I'm not worthless to society. I could still very much be out there working and earning my own way. Now, I don't get Social Security because I taught in a private pension system. By teaching, I taught in a private system. But I did give money away out of every paycheck so that I would earn something when I retired as a teacher. But I also saved money for my own personal retirement so that I'm living pretty well off. But why not make every American do that?
Well,
why not change the system and then take the extra money and spend it on the young people? Spend it on the people under the age of 8. That doesn't seem like a hard solution. I know I'm not the most intelligent person in the world. I've always said, I'm not successful because I was smart. I'm successful because I worked harder than most people. Okay. And I lived at a time when hard work paid off. And I understand that too. All you young people who I hope are listening to the show, you don't need to inundate my mailbox with, well, you just don't get it. It's not the same anymore. Yeah, I do get it. It's not the same anymore, which is why we need to change the system.
Well, and it doesn't, all of that said, right? None of that changes the reality that 16% of our children are living in poverty, which I think as a country, that should be unacceptable.
As a first world nation who say you're leader of the world, that's a percentage that you're comfortable living with? That doesn't upset you people? Come on, I know our show generally runs towards an older age group, okay? That doesn't upset you? That we have 16% of our young people, which make up 20% of our population, living in poverty? You're not upset about that? You can't write a congressman or a congresswoman and get them to do something about that? You're not walking the streets protesting for the government to do something to take care of young people? Shame on you. If you are part of my generation or older and you're not out there campaigning with your local, state, and national politicians to do something about this mess that 20% of our population, 1 out of 5 of our population, that almost 20% of them are living in poverty, shame on you.
And the younger generation needs to do well to take care of the older generation. Is that not the give and take of our society? Well, it should be. I don't know if it is, but it ought to be. The oldest generation and the youngest generation need one another, right? And so do the people in between. We're all interdependent based on the system we've built, but the system was built a long time ago, and it's time to look at it honestly, frankly, admit where it's failing, right? And we are failing children, and say that we have to do better and be committed to doing better. And doing better for children doesn't have to come at the expense of doing well for the elderly. In fact, I think the changes that Lance and I have before discussed, the notion of, when you're young, when you're born, the government puts, $5,000 into basically an investment account with a guaranteed return that's specifically earmarked for you. It's better for everybody. You fulfill your commitment to the people that have been paying into Social Security, and for everybody, born effective immediately, you switch them to the new system. And yes, it'll be a painful economic transition, but we've talked about before, the system is unsustainable the way that it is designed. Now, we've covered 3 of the 4 points. The last one we saved almost no time for, and there's a reason for that. I asked you to think about what it was during the course of the program, and we'll see if you guessed right. The last reason is the everything shortage. The everything shortage. The pandemic obviously created shortages for many goods, including cars, semiconductors, by the way, I mentioned those in the first segment, furniture, and many others. Factories and ports cope with virus outbreaks and worker shortages at the same time that consumer demand for physical goods has surged. And for much of the pandemic, there was government stimulus that made money available to people to spend on things, right? So The supply chain is interconnected, and baby formula can be affected by the fact that there's shortages in other areas. Of course, we also talked about the problem here with baby formula being that because usually the demand is pretty steady, it's predictable, which means that the supply has been designed to meet that demand, right? There's no reason to have this huge amount of baby formula that nobody can buy. However, I think this demonstrates that there is a reason. And going back to the gerontocracy, Lance, I'd say, and this is mentioned in the article, 100% agree with, it's time for a national stockpile of baby formula. That seems like a common sense. We stockpile other items of substantial national importance, and the fact that baby formula is not one of those goes back to that mismatch in society. 16% of children are living in poverty, and we don't set aside baby formula in the midst of national crisis so that crap like what's happening the last several months doesn't happen.
Just a shout out to truck drivers. You know, those of you who travel the roads like I do, and we know sometimes we get upset with semi drivers and this, that, and the other. And, you know, man, they seem to be taking up all 3 lanes of the highway or whatever. Hey, God bless them, because folks, you should be waving. And, you know, I know during the pandemic, we banged pots and pans and different things for the medical workers. These truck drivers are out there with all this traffic and all these, if you live in Ohio anyway, it's orange barrel season, all these road construction crews out there working, trying to make the roads better, but they're battling all that, trying to get our goods to market. You know, so when you're driving, give them a little bit of leeway, give them some room, let them get to where they're going. Don't make it any more stressful of a job than it already is. Because if you're railing about the supply chain, truck drivers are the key to that supply chain.
Why did we do this show today, Lance? What was the goal?
Well, because here at True Chat, we have a mission. And our mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And the subsidiary reason is I wanted to get fired up today, and I think I did. But doggone it, folks, if you're not passionate about something, then you just kind of frizzle away on the vine. So you've got to stay, you know, fighting for something. And if you enjoy the show and you enjoy that attitude and it made you stop and think, then tell your friends about us. And if they say, well, where can I listen to this? It sounds stimulating. It sounds like something that would boost my day and my morale. Then tell them as a podcast, they can find our show on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found.
The State of Us is available Tuesdays and Thursdays, released first thing in the morning. That's when new episodes of the podcast come out. Then you can also hear those same episodes on the weekends, AM and FM radio stations across the country. What do you think, Lance? Who wins the word of the day today?
I don't know. I'm not sure it really matched. It was your game today.
Oh, it was my game. Okay.
Yeah,
I'll take the win then. I'll take it.
Yeah, well,
I'll claim it.
You know, we'll let Bradley decide.
We'll let Bradley make sure that the victory goes to the correct person.
I mean, I'm the old person. I should win.
Oh, well, yeah. Yes, we are living in a gerontocracy after all.
That's
so.
right.
For the State of Us, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to producer Bradley Butch. Thank you all, our audience, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.